Right now, we are getting another big story. Sources, in fact, are telling CNN IBN that India is now likely to vote against Sri Lanka at the UN Human Rights Council later this month. US-sponsored resolution will likely to be procedural. Resolution will likely not to be an intrusive remedy. Parul joining us live. Parul, what does this mean?
Yeah, basically this means, Karma, that like last year at the UN Human Rights Council, this year India is set to vote against Sri Lanka. This is a US-sponsored resolution that we're talking about. Essentially, India will vote against Sri Lanka for three reasons as we understand it. One, India itself is not satisfied about Sri Lanka's progress over the last 1 year in implementing the recommendations of its own Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. Second, India is comfortable with the language that this resolution is now taking. This resolution will not expect Sri Lanka to accept international monitoring of its efforts to bring to book those guilty of war crimes in that country. India's position has been that has to be a Sri Lanka-led process. So India is comfortable with the fact that this is not an intrusive resolution. It will not impose on Sri Lanka international monitoring of its efforts. And finally, India, of course, mindful of the sentiment, the political sentiment in Tamil Nadu, Karma. The sentiment there basically is an expectation of the Indian government to join the international community in pressurizing Sri Lanka to bring to account people responsible for war crimes and human rights violations. For these three reasons, India is now looking likely to vote against Sri Lanka at the UN Human Rights Council.
Right. Outcome of this, Parul, in terms of Sri Lanka's now newfound closeness towards China, will this move by India further strain ties with the island nation?
Well, certainly Sri Lanka does expect India to not vote against it at the UN Human Rights Council. That at least is a publicly articulated position of Colombo. However, Colombo also understands India's moves last year. Colombo understands it will be very difficult for India to not take that kind of a position, given that India has frequently been talking about how Sri Lanka needs to do more on the issue of human rights violations. So the fact that India will vote again this year against Sri Lanka will not come as a complete surprise. Will it strain ties? Remains to be seen. But certainly there's also an element of discomfort, Karma, here in Delhi about being forced in a sense by domestic politics to take certain positions on foreign policy. That is something that is beginning to bother the government. It does not like being put into a corner, in a sense handing down veto to state governments on issues of foreign policy. And yes, you're right. The other big concern is pushing Sri Lanka into the Chinese corner by steps that Sri Lanka is not happy about. These are the ways and these are the pros and cons that India actually has to balance. But at the moment, India's decision coming out in favor of voting against Sri Lanka at the UN Human Rights Council.